The performance data form in whole is an annual report that you have to do, all state grantees in the District of Columbia. This data form collects fiscal information and data on performance measures. But actually the form consists of 3 data modules. The first module is what we used to call the Grantee Survey. And that started way back in 1983 or 84. And so it's the longest running data collection form that I know of. And the results get published each year in the annual report to Congress. Module 2 is the relatively new part of the form, dealing with LIHEAP performance measures that you're required to report on. And module 3 is the optional performance measures that you can, if you choose so, can complete. The data from the module 1 is published in the annual LIHEAP report to Congress. It's also published in the performance management website's LIHEAP Data Warehouse, and we use it a lot to respond to congressional and White House inquiries. The performance data form, I have to tell you, is behind schedule in the sense that we should have had it already reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget, but we haven't. It hasn't even gone yet to the Office of Management and Budget. It's going through internal review in HHS. So I can tell you that don't expect us coming back to you saying, "Oh, you got to get this the module 1 information to us by January 1st." I mean, by the end of January. I think last year it was middle, if I'm not mistaken, it was the middle of January. Upon approval by OMB, we'll publish, as we always do, an action transmittal with the final due date. And that will be what you'd be looking for, and instructions for accessing and submitting the form in the OLDC system. Right now, you cannot currently certify or submit the form, even though you might see it in OLDC, but we encourage you to prepare the information needed for the report, so when you get the date, you'll be ready to go. Also, we've not proposed any changes from the FY16 performance data form. We've tried to enhance some of the instructions. We'd like to hear from you if there's some instructions that's still not clear that we can improve upon. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Melissa.
Okay. If you go to the next slide. Patrice, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon or good morning to all grantees. My name is Patrice West, and I am the Regional Liaison for Regions 1, 5, and 10. As you know, all grantees are assigned a liaison to assist them, and also an alternate liaison will be able to assist you if your primary liaison isn't available. As a liaison, we give guidance in program operations. We provide resources to help you with the program and your reporting requirements and any HHS requirements. There's a link here that gives information for liaison contact information for us. And also, even though this isn't listed here, if you have any issues with your OLDC access, you can also reach out to your liaison so that we could help you with gaining access to OLDC. And we can move on.
Melissa, I have just one point of clarification. I think I mistakenly said module 1 would be due. It's going to be module 1 and 2 when we publish the date. I'm sorry, I misinformed people.
Okay, great. And we'll mention that again before the end of the webinar. We'll talk a little bit about the steps grantees take to submit their data. So just to highlight an overview of this webinar, we're going to focus on Module 1 of the Performance Data Form. And many of you who have been around a while know this is the Grantee Survey portion. This used to be a separate report, and as Leon mentioned, these two, the Grantee Survey and the performance measures, have been combined into one Performance Data Form. This webinar is going to focus on step-by-step guidance for reporting, so we're going to go through all the lines and parts. For those of you who are more experienced that maybe don't need to sit through this or would prefer not to sit through this, we will be doing another webinar on January 17th, which just focuses kind of on high-level things that you need to be checking before you submit your report. So many folks found on the household report that both this webinar and the considerations and common issues webinar were useful. So feel free, if you need to hop off, you're welcome to do so. Question and answer after each section that we go through. We are going to go through just an overview of Module 1. We're going to talk about each section of the module. We're going to talk about some common reporting questions and issues, and at the end we're going to highlight additional resources. And even though we put additional resources at the end, I can't underscore enough that we're going to talk about a lot today, but until you get into your own data, a lot of the questions aren't going to kind of surface until then. And so we just want to really encourage you that we know every grantee is different, and all of you have different program designs. All of you may be at a different level in terms of completing this report, and we always encourage you to call us, and we can help walk through any aspect of this report. So we're going to just start with an overview of the Grantee Survey. Module 1 is really designed to obtain fiscal data on sources and uses of LIHEAP funds. The best way I can think about this is that really this is an accounting of what resources you brought into your LIHEAP 2017 program and what resources you obligated out of your 2017 program. And so really we're looking at money in, money out. And when we say that, we're talking about obligations, and I'll definitely touch on that a few different times during the webinar, that difference between obligation and expenditures. This form also looks at average household benefits and maximum income cutoffs for 4-person household. The module consists of 4 sections. The first is grantee information. The second are your reporting requirements. Section 3 and 4 are the sources and uses of funds, and that's really where we're going to focus our time on sections 3 and 4 today. Grantees must complete the informations in section 1, 3, and 4 in order for the form to be complete. We're going to talk a lot about reporting rules to follow, and just like in the household report, we want to make sure that grantees have a good understanding of why they exist. As you all know, LIHEAP is a block grant, and any of you who have talked to other providers or even listened in on training webinars know that grantees not only have the flexibility to design their programs to fit their needs, but they do, right? So every program and every person you meet does things a little bit differently. That being said, OCS still has to report consistent information to Congress. And so the rules that we're going to go over really allow OCS to report data in a consistent manner and allow it to be compared from state to state. That being said, as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, every state is different, and all of you are going to have different questions and issues when it comes to completing this report, and we encourage you to reach out to us so we can help you figure out how to best fit your program into these reporting requirements. As Leon mentioned, there are no changes from the 2016 performance data form. We're going to start by talking about sources of LIHEAP funds. And so for those of you who have balanced your checkbook, this is really talking about the money coming in. And we're talking about the ability of money, or the availability of money in FY 2017. And so this includes federal funds designated for LIHEAP for FY 2017, net any set-asides to Indian tribes and tribal organizations. So when we say that set-aside to tribes and tribal organizations, we're talking about the money that is given directly from OCS to tribes. The sources of funds will also include prior year unobligated funds. So we'll talk about this in later slides, what carryover means and obligation, but it does include money that came into the year from the previous year. For 2017, sources of funds should not include money that was obligated in previous years, even if it was spent this year. So once again, we'll get into that a little bit more, but we're not talking about expenditures. We're talking about obligations. Funds that were dedicated as set-asides, I mentioned that earlier, and then non-federal funds. Many of you use LIHEAP in conjunction with other funds, DOE or fuel funds, and we're really only interested in LIHEAP funding on this form. The reporting period is very important. We visited a lot of states who have program years that, for example, are on the calendar year, or they run from July 1 to June 30. But we're interested in the reporting period, which is the federal fiscal year, October 1 through September 30. So the data used in the report should reflect that federal fiscal year. And it's very important that for some folks, this can kind of create a reporting conundrum, but what we've noticed in most states is that they have accounting systems that would allow them to examine both their program year fiscal data as well as their federal fiscal year. But for this purpose of this report, we really need states to focus on the federal fiscal year. The sources of funds section has pre-populated data. And so some of the pre-populated fields are editable and some are not. Pre-populated fields that are editable, what we want you to do is go in and check your own records. And we're going to go through each line, so we'll give a specific example of when you need to be checking and when you need to be calling OCS if something's locked. But you want to make sure that the number OCS is putting in that field matches what you have in your own records. All of the amounts in the locked field should be correct. If they're not, if you go back and look at your records or something doesn't look right, we encourage you to contact your liaison. It is absolutely your responsibility to review pre-populated information and to verify it's correct. One year, there was a mix-up in the data. Everybody's forms were pre-populated. These people submitted their forms, and one state noticed that the number was off and realized the number was actually off for all states. And so each state had to go back in and correct their already submitted forms. And so it's really important for you to go in and check and make sure those numbers match up with what you're seeing at your end. This applies to just a few of you. Some of you are definitely on the ball and already initiated your 2017 forms prior to the sources of funds data being pre-populated. So this slide is really for you. It talks about the steps that you need to take to go in and delete your current version and reinitialize the form and then confirm that the pre-populated data is correct. If you, those of you with this issue need help or want someone to help walk you through this, please go ahead and contact us at Apprise. So this is what Section 3 looks like. And once again, this is the money that is basically coming into your LIHEAP FY 2017 program. Some of these figures are pre-populated, and in others, they expect you to populate or edit the data. So we're going to go through each of these lines, and we'll also talk about why so many of those are zeros. So Part A is all funds except leveraging incentive awards. We'll jump right into this. So this is the block grant allotment. This is going to be the lion's share of your LIHEAP funding for FY 2017. Once again, this is going to be pre-populated, and it's also going to be it's not going to include set-asides to Indian tribes and tribal organizations. So you shouldn't need to worry about that at all. But once again, it's very important that you check this amount. This is locked from editing. So if there's an issue or you see something that doesn't look right, you're going to need to call your OCS liaison to verify the number and, if necessary, change it. Next slide. These are emergency contingency funds. I want to start out by saying that for this year, it's going to be zero for all states, but this slide does talk about what emergency contingency funds are. And I know there are a lot of new coordinators out there, And we do often get emergency contingency funds during the year. And so in the case, in other years, what you'll see is that if you got money, this field would be pre-populated and would be locked from editing, and you should compare what you have in your fiscal records to confirm it's correct. But for this year, the number should be 0. This is reallotted funds. So reallotted funds are the funds that HHS releases during the fiscal year once all the states kind of send their money back that they need to send back to HHS, and HHS kind of determines that these are available for redistribution based on the LIHEAP statute. Once again, this is pre-populated for you and is locked by from editing, but you need to check it. These are contingency funds carried over. So for those of you who are new, sometimes we'll get emergency contingency funds late in the year. And in some of those cases, OCS will allow grantees to carry those funds into the next year without being subject to the 10% carryover limit. This year, that number is 0, but in future years, that could be populated. This line contains the state's 2016 unobligated block grant funds that were carried over for obligation. I'm going to pause here a second. We do talk about obligation later, but I'm going to bring it up here as well. Every state has a different definition of what an obligation is, but what I will point out is that obligation is not the same as an expenditure. So many of you may contract out with subgrantees, you may contract out for a certain amount, and they may not spend it until the following year, but it's still considered obligated for some of you. It's very important to understand your state's definition of obligation, and that way you can more easily understand what is carryover and what isn't. 10% of funds each year do not need to be obligated. They can be carried over into the following year for obligation. And so we will talk a little bit more about carryover, but this is an area where we see a lot of states fumble a little bit. It's pre-populated by OCS and can be edited by grantees. What we want you to do is go in and edit the amount to reflect the funds that were carried over into 2017. So when you balance your checkbook, you look at the money that you've carried, or at least this is how we used to do it. You look at the money that you're carrying over from one month into another, and that's similar to kind of here. You're looking at those unobligated funds that you're carrying forward into the year, and that counts as a source of funding for 2017. If you want to go to the next slide. Once again, the amount in the slide should not include funds that were obligated in 2016, even if they were expended in 2017. Many of you will obligate funds to community action agencies or weatherization agencies, or even perhaps do a contract with an IT vendor or another vendor, and you will obligate funds to those agreements or contracts. But those funds may not be spent until this, the subsequent year. That is not counted as carryover. Those obligated funds are obligated. When we talk about carryover, we're talking about those monies that are unobligated. And once again, you need to check your state definition, but in most cases that includes money that isn't contractually or tied to something. And so it's important that you go and you talk to your fiscal folks about what that means. The amount in this line should be equal to the amount in line 7 of your 2016 Grantee Survey and the carryover amount in your carryover and reallotment report. This is where we start talking about those cross-reporting validations. All of the reports for your LIHEAP program should tell a consistent story for the year. So in other words, in 2016, you're going to put together 2 reports. You're going to put together a grantee survey that says, I am taking X dollars out and carrying it over into 2017. And in 2017, that's going to show up as a source. In 2016, in your carryover report, you're going to say, we're not obligating this much money and we're carrying it over into 2017, and that should match both your 2016 and 17 grantee surveys. Now, we know that the carryover report is done in the end of the summer, in some cases before your program year is even done. And so what we always recommend is that grantees go back once they've done, their fiscal wrap up for the program or the fiscal year, that they go in and adjust those carryover amounts in both the 2016 carryover report, so that when you go into your 2017 grantee survey and we check it, it's not going to pop up a warning. And so we have some examples of these boxes for those of you who are more visual like me. Your 2016 carryover and reallotment report should match your 2016 uses of funds report, because a use of your funds is, okay, 10% of my funds, depending on your state, 10% of my funds I'm carrying over into the next year. That's how I'm using those funds. We take that information from the 2016 grantee survey section and we use it to pre-populate the 2017 sources of funds. It's very important that those all be consistent. Here's another visual example so that you can actually go in and look at these different reports in OLDC and make sure that all of them are matching up. The carryover and reallotment report from 2016, the 2016 grantee survey in terms of uses of funds, and both of those should line up with sources of funds that are noted in your FY 2017 grantee survey. Line 7, once again, this is going to be 0 for all states, but this is a nice slide to explain something we get asked a lot about, which is what is this whole petroleum violation escrow? What does this even mean? And so there's a great example here of what that is, but in 2017, we expect this to be 0 for all states. The Residential Energy Assistance Challenge, some of you might be familiar with this, others aren't. REACH funds are made available by HHS on kind of an application award basis. It's pre-populated by OCS when there are numbers here, but in 2017, we expect to see zeros across the board. Okay. So another source of funds for some states is the Leveraging Incentive Award. In the past, Leveraging Incentive Awards have been given out by HHS as a reward for acquiring leveraged or supplemental energy assistance funding. In 2017, there was no Leveraging Incentive Funds awarded, so this amount will be 0. In some cases, previous leveraging incentive awards are obligated in the following year. Once again, we're talking about a moot point because we expect this to be 0 because we haven't had a leveraging incentive award for the past couple of years. Estimated total sources of funds. So once you put all of these amounts in, and I say put in, they're pre-populated, so once you edit or confirm that all of the amounts are correct, line 11 here will show you the sum of items 1 through 10. And what we're going to talk about later is, it says right here, it should equal the sum in section 4, because ultimately at the end of the day, just like your checkbook, we want the sources of funds to balance out with uses of funds. And so that's what this next slide is about. There are a few exceptions which we will talk about. So for example, in some cases, states will exceed the 10% carryover, in which case some funds have to be sent back to HHS. In those cases, we're going to show you how to enter that in your form, but it will mean that the sources and uses are actually off and they won't balance it. But we provide some detailed information about that later in the webinar. So are there questions about the sources of funds that are largely pre-populated, but that really require you to go in and confirm and edit where necessary?
Hi everyone, this is Michelle from Apprise, and I just wanted to remind you all about how you go about asking a question in GoToWebinar. So you can either raise your hand, and then during these question breaks, I will unmute you so you can ask your question to the group, or at any time during the webinar, please feel free to type in a question, and then during the question breaks, I'll read them out to the group and get your question answered. So just as a quick reminder on how to go about that. But right now, Melissa, it doesn't look like we have any questions on this section.
Okay, great. I will just say that for those of you who are new and you're wondering where you need to put your time in terms of Section 3, you know, in addition to just confirming that the amounts are correct, that carryover amount is the one that people tend to get kind of tripped up on. So, you know, making sure that that carryover amount is consistent between your 2016 reports and what you're seeing in your 2017 sources is probably where you'll need to spend the most time if necessary. So we're going to move on to uses of LIHEAP funds. So this section takes all of those sources of funds that were in the previous and says, how did you break those out among all the different parts of your LIHEAP program? How did you use them? Keep in mind that we're talking about obligations, not expenditures. The statute does not define for you what obligation means. We do provide a really awesome resource put together by the Clearinghouse that I'd recommend you all take a look at, that really talks about what an obligation is, some examples, and what carryover means, and so on. And so we have the link for that at the end of the webinar. But it's really important that you recognize that we're not talking about expenditures here. We're talking about obligations. And so this includes funds carried over from 2016 but obligated in 2017. It includes funds obligated in 2017, even if you're not going to spend them until 2018. Once again, this goes into obligations. What it doesn't include are funds that were not obligated by the end of 2017 and will be returned to OCS. We'll talk about that a little more. And funds that were obligated in 2016, even if they were expended this year. So that gets back into that obligation versus expenditure. Just like we mentioned before with the sources of funds, even if you run your program on a different timeline than the federal fiscal year, we're only interested in reporting for the time period between October 1 and September 30. So if you're having challenges pulling together reports for that time period, please feel free to call your liaison or Apprise so we can help with that. The best way I know how to, as a former grantee, describe this is really to start by looking at the household report you all just submitted. Section 4, the funding uses that you're going to go over, should really match the types of assistance reported in your household report. And so if you reported assisting households, in most cases you should be able to report the total funds that were obligated to that particular component, the average household benefit, and the maximum annual dollar income. There are some exceptions, but in most cases we'd want to see figures in those fields if you reported assisted households. If you don't report information for a type of assistance reported in your household, you need to add a note explaining why you're not reporting any obligated funds. Let me give you an example. For whatever reason, you allocated weatherization money in, you obligated it in 2016, or you, I've just gotten myself all mixed up. Let me jump down to the next one. If you obligated funding to a type of assistance, you should have reported assisting households with that type of assistance. One example is that you need to add a note explaining why you have put money obligated, but they're not reported in your household report. So I obligated money to weatherization, but they're not going to expend it until next year. So there may not be households to report assistance for, and so that would be this exception. Either way, when you start to see things that don't match assisted households in the household report but no money in the grantee survey, or money in the grantee survey but no assisted households in the household report, we're going to want to see a note explaining why there's that discrepancy. So types of LIHEAP assistance. For each line, you'll notice there are 3 columns. You'll also notice that the possible uses of funds and the types of LIHEAP assistance very closely resemble those in the household report. And so we're going to kind of walk through these. The first is the heating assistance benefit. So in the first column, we're going to want to talk about the amount of funds obligated for heating assistance benefits in FY 2017. Heating assistance benefits include funds allocated for regular heating assistance to pay a share of household heating bills. In some states, this also may include other non-crisis heating assistance like furnace repairs or replacements done on a non-emergency basis. If we're talking about things that are beyond bill payment assistance or kind of your standard heating assistance, we ask that grantees include a note in the notes section that describes what that might be and indicates the amount of funds that you used for it. Oh, I should put a note here. So heating assistance line, when we talk about total funds obligated, it does not include administration costs. Those are accounted for in another line. Many states break up their administration costs by program component, and so even if you do that, it would not be counted in this line. We talked about this at the household report webinar. Some grantees don't have a separate crisis component, but they provide expedited heating assistance to households in crisis situations. And so for those states, you have 2 options when reporting expedited heating assistance. You can report all funding obligated to assist households with heating, both regular and expedited under heating assistance. Or you can report the funding obligated to assist households with regular heating assistance under heating and the funding used for expedited under crisis. What we do add is that you add a note that explains if you've put it all under heating assistance, make sure that you indicate in the notes section that some households did receive expedited heating assistance so that we know that. Once again, it's the same concept. You're going to indicate the amount of funds obligated for cooling assistance benefits in FY 2017. This includes kind of your standard bill payment assistance, and it also includes non-crisis cooling assistance like AC installations that are done on a non-emergency basis. We talk about those things outside of bill payment assistance. Once again, we ask you to create a note that describes what those might be and the amount of funds that you used for it. Once again, administration of cooling associated with cooling assistance component should not be counted in this line. We do have crisis assistance benefits by type, and so every grantee sets their own criteria for crisis assistance. This is defined in your model plan. Any reporting, once again, that we see here in the grantee survey should be consistent with your household report and your plan. All of those things tell a story about your program. They should all tell a consistent story. We want crisis assistance benefits in the grantee survey to be reported under different categories as appropriate. So we're going to go through those categories. Once again, the kind of best practice is really to look at your household report, take a look at how you reported it there, and carry that categorization of your crisis benefits, however you categorize those, carry that forward into your grantee survey. So you see this, for those of you who are visual, we're talking about this section, or this part 3, and we'll jump right into winter crisis. So as you know, every state can define their crisis differently, but we're really interested here in looking at winter. Typically, winter crisis assistance is delivered under the same timeline as the state's heating assistance program. This may not always be the case, though, but that's what we typically see. just like in the previous heating section and cooling section, we do not want the administration costs reflected in this line. When we talk about examples, this could be bill payment assistance after a disconnection or disconnect notice. It could include emergency fuel delivery as well. Summer crisis, similar concept. Usually in states, summer crisis is provided under the same timeline as the state's cooling assistance program. Administration should be excluded from this line. And in most cases, summer crisis assistance includes bill payment assistance after disconnection or disconnect notice. You'll notice in the heating assistance, we said we wanted you to include non-emergency equipment repair and replacement, but in this particular section, in the crisis section, we actually have a separate line for equipment repair and replacement. Which funds should be reported as year-round? So once again, this is really a matter of what your state has defined as their crisis period. But year-round would, in some states, folks deliver crisis assistance from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, regardless of seasons. And once again, for those of you who do just expedited crisis, we've given guidance on slide 43, so this cross-references you back to this as you look through these slides again as you're putting together your report. Administration should be included, and the examples of year-round crisis are similar to winter and summer crisis programs in that it could include bill payment assistance after a disconnect or an emergency fuel delivery. This is where things get fun, right? So every program is different and everyone offers different kinds of crisis components. So we're gonna ask states to specify what kinds of crisis benefits they're giving and then provide the data for each of these. And so this is a great slide in that it basically tells you that top line is going to auto-calculate based on what you enter in the green box. And so if we go to the next slide, we have some examples of what you should be including. So any funds obligated to delivering other crisis assistance to households. This is beyond your normal winter, summer, and year-round crisis. It could include emergency furnace repairs and replacements. Some of you do loan and space heaters. Some of you provide blankets. There's a couple states that will do hotel rooms or help with rent if it means maintaining electricity, payment of reconnection fees. There's all kinds of different ways that states break this out, but what we're asking you to do is break it out. And on the next slide, we have an example. So we've put emergency furnace repair and replacement here. This is one of the more common ones that we see. And so we ask you to just specify what that is. If you do need more room to clarify what that component might be, you can use the notes section. But here we've said that a little over $1 million has been obligated for emergency furnace repair and replacement. We have weatherization assistance benefits. So once again, you're going to exclude the administration, and we're going to exclude weatherization funds for, include weatherization funds for other non-crisis assistance. So keep in mind that for some states, weatherization may cover things that are emergency furnace equipment repair and replacement. Your state's going to need to really understand what would go under weatherization versus what goes under crisis, because you can do emergency equipment repair in both. So you're going to want to report LIHEAP funds only in this line. That's really important. In the past, we've had states who include their DOE funds, and we know that LIHEAP is often paired with other leveraged funding, but we don't want to see it in this report. We're really only interested in LIHEAP monies. we just kind of point back to the statute here. We know there are a lot of new coordinators. When we go through this form, one of the things that's being checked is making sure that these caps that are in place, the 15% for weatherization, for example, the 10% for admin, we'll talk about in a little bit, all of these caps are being auto-checked in the background to make sure that the state isn't obligating more than they're allowed. And in this case, 15% of LIHEAP funds can be obligated to weatherization. Under certain conditions, HHS may grant a waiver that raises the limit to 25%. If you are a state that has received a waiver, we ask that you please note this in the notes section. Several uses of LIHEAP funds, I just mentioned this, are limited to a certain percent of funds allocated or payable. In 2017, funds allocated and funds payable are the same. They're defined as the sum of the following sources of funds: the block grant allotment, which is that lion's share we talked about in your sources of funds, and reallotted funds. The reason we're putting this in there is that all throughout the statute, we see funds allocated versus funds payable, and we wanted to clarify for grantees what this means. It is our understanding that funds allocated and funds payable are the sum of these two. This is the average household benefit. We're not going to go through each line like we did before, but what we are going to say is that for each type of assistance, the average household benefit should take into account all types of benefit provided under that type of assistance during the fiscal year. So, for example, some states offer a heating assistance benefit and then may offer a supplemental heating assistance benefit. Some states may offer a heating assistance benefit and a non-emergency furnace repair that also is under the heating assistance component. The average household benefit should take into account all types of benefits under that particular component. The average benefit is calculated by summing the benefit amounts across all households and dividing by the total of number of households that received that assistance. The average benefit for households should only reflect direct benefits to the household. So that's important. If you need assistance calculating that average benefit, we encourage you to call us and we'll help walk you through that. And then finally, the maximum annual dollar income for households. We provide some pretty good guidance on these next slides. You'll want to highlight this for your IT person or whoever is pulling together your report. We're interested in seeing the maximum annual dollar income cutoff for a 4-person household that was in effect at the beginning of FY 2017. And so we've given you guidance here that we know that the poverty guidelines that were in effect at the beginning of 2017 were the 2016 poverty guidelines. However, if a grantee's LIHEAP program component began after the release of the 2017 federal poverty guidelines, that grantee may choose to use those in its survey reporting. So for example, last year or in previous years, people who start the cooling program later in the program year may use the newer income guidelines to administer that component. And so we may see a different income guideline for a cooling program, for example, than we would for the heating assistance program. Whenever that is the case, or whenever you're using the newer poverty guidelines, we ask that you put a note in the notes section. If you haven't caught on, there's a theme. Really, the notes section is the catch-all place, right, to explain. We talked about the fact that grantees are all so different, and yet we have this very kind of consistent, uniform way of reporting, and things don't always fit just right. And so that notes section is really the place for you to clarify what you mean. And it's a chance for a prize to say, okay, we get it. That's great. We don't need to follow up. Or, oh, you know what? We get it, but we think you should be reporting it a little bit differently. Let us show you how. If your state used a higher dollar income cutoff for a specific group of households, such as elderly households, and a lower dollar income cutoff for everyone else, we want you to report the lower of the two. And then we also would like you, once again, in the notes section, to kind of tell us what that higher income cutoff is and to which groups it applies. So this is a newer, it's not new, it was in the report last year, but this is a newer component that folks are still building into their systems and their reporting, their canned reports. This is a chance to report the total average annual per household bill payment assistance benefits by main heating fuel type for those households with 12 consecutive months of both main fuel and electric bill data. Now that's a mouthful, but what this is really providing a chance to kind of get a head start on your performance management reporting, which is in the next module, right? So we're only interested in those households who have 12 months of electric and main heating fuel data that are going to be counted in Module 2. And for those households, we want to know the average bill payment assistance benefit. Now, that bill payment assistance benefit includes, if you want to go to the next slide real quick, includes any heating, cooling, crisis, and supplemental assistance used to pay household energy bills. That includes utility deposits and benefits to assist with secondary fuel payments. It does not include nominal payments to SNAP households, weatherization, or equipment repair and replacement. And so can you go back to the last slide, Michelle? So this line should be equal to line B1 of section 5 of the performance data form. Now, we're not going to go over module 2 today, but when we do, we're going to tell you that line B1 should match this line in your grantee survey. So this is another one of those cross validations that we do across your reports to make sure that the numbers are consistently being reported for your state. So in some states, this is just kind of underscoring this annual total LIHEAP benefit per household that we just talked about. In some states, households receive multiple bill payment assistance during the year. For example, they get a regular heating and a crisis benefit. Some people may get a regular supplemental, crisis, or multiple. In these cases, grantees will first need to add together the bill payment assistance for each household and then calculate the average total LIHEAP benefit per household. And there's an example here for those of you who have other folks building your reports, or if you're building your report, there's an example here to walk you through that. So Part B gets to other permitted uses of LIHEAP funds. So Part A, you'll notice, was really the way that you obligated money toward services to clients. It's really kind of the heart of the LIHEAP program, right? But there are other things that we spend our money on. The first is these nominal payments. Now, we've talked about this before. These are for those states who are doing a heat neat or cool neat program that works together in conjunction with your SNAP program. There are only a few states that actually have a separate SNAP component, and so those are the only states that would really need to worry about this, but this is really the funds obligated toward that particular component. This is once again where I think a lot of new coordinators, it's a great learning opportunity, and a lot of experienced coordinators can get a little bit tripped up is when we start talking about these unobligated funds. So remember, we talked about a source of funds being money carried in from the previous year. Now we're talking about uses of funds. So if I have 2017 funds that were unobligated and I'm carrying them over into 2018, this is the place where I'm going to put them. The LIHEAP statute allows states to hold available 10% of unobligated funds. So in other words, when you get an allocation or you have funds payable, 90% of that needs to be obligated in the year it was awarded. In the following year, you can obligate the remaining 10%. But that will need to be accounted for here in line 7. So the field here is once again, remember we talked about all these carryover amounts are referenced in your carryover and reallotment forms, and they need to match up. So you'll notice in your grantee survey that line 7 is going to be pre-populated with the carryover amount in your 2017 carryover and reallotment report. Now, I don't know if Heather Jones is on the call, but she would tell all of you that it is routine in her office and in many offices that even though your carry over reallotment report is due, in the summer or at the end of the summer, many of your programs aren't finished yet. Refunds haven't all come in, for example. There are a lot of different things still moving and moving parts. And so oftentimes, maybe when your fiscal folks do their fiscal reporting in December or sooner, they're going to true up that carryover amount. When that happens, it is important for the grantee to go into their carryover reallotment report and update that number accordingly, because that number is carried forth into your grantee survey. So if necessary, you're going to need, if you have trued it up, or you are in the process of doing that, you can edit the pre-populated amount in the grantee survey, but if you edit it, you also need to go back to your carryover and reallotment report and edit it there. So in the cases where a state has more than 10% of funds unobligated, anything in excess of that 10% must be returned to the federal government. And so this is a really important piece for those of you who know that you are going to be sending money back or already have. Line 7 should only include funds carried over into 2018, up to that 10%. If your state returned excess unobligated funds, you should exclude these from line 7. Doing this is going to cause the uses of funds and sources of funds to not match. We understand this. And so you can, if those numbers don't match, you can still submit your form. You'll get a warning. You can still submit your form, though, but you need to include a note that says we are sending additional unobligated funds back to HHS in the amount of. So I already mentioned this, but I can't underscore the importance enough that this is where we see a lot of people trip up. The line in your 2017 carryover and reallotment report should match line 7 in your 2017 uses of funds. And so for some of you, it may require truing up both. You may go into your grantee survey and have an accurate number and need to edit the pre-populated figure. And just remember when you get that warning that crops up to go back into your carryover and reallotment report and update that as well. In this case, we expect the line to be 0, but as I mentioned before, if there were emergency contingency award funds with the condition that you didn't need to, or they weren't subject to the 10% carryover limit, this is the line where you would put them if you're carrying forward or unobligated funds. But for this year, this is a moot because we didn't get emergency contingency, and so this should be 0. Once again, this is a moot slide, but it's important just for new coordinators to understand that in the future this could be there. Any leveraging incentive awards that were received in 2017 and obligated forward into 2018 would be put here as well. So many or some of you may use some of your LIHEAP funds for leverage incentive activities. And so this is money that you can use to identify, develop, and demonstrate leveraging. And the LIHEAP statute limits this amount to the greater of 0.08% of funds payable or $35,000. And so if any of you used money for this purpose, this line 11 is where you would place this. Line 12 is for Assurance 16 activities. For those of you who are familiar, you know that this includes all kinds of services that encourage and enable households to reduce their home energy needs and their need for energy assistance. the statute limits this amount to 5% of funds payable. So once again, we're going back into those caps, and you're going to get warnings when you try to put in, if you put in a dollar amount here that exceeds 5% of your funds payable, you're going to get a warning. So it's important to be paying attention to that. Line 13 is REACH. Once again, this line is 0 because there were no REACH awards provided to grantees, but if in the future there is, this is where you would report that. And then this is where things get fun. So administration and planning costs. So this is the amount of funds obligated for administration and planning, regardless of program component. All state and local administration and planning costs, and this includes both direct and indirect costs charged as administration, should go in line 14. On the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit. We've been getting a lot of questions lately about this. So grantees have the flexibility to define what counts as administrative planning costs versus program. Administration for weatherization is included in the administration costs. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. The cap here is 10%, as many of you know, so that's something else that will pop up if you've put in an amount that is more than 10% of funds payable, then it will pop up a warning. This is a very important piece for those of you who have classified some of your IT expenditures as program related. You'll notice there really isn't a place to put that in the form. And so what we're asking you to do is put your program related information technology expenditures into the same line as your admin. However, you should include a note that it identifies the amount that was obligated to program related IT expenditures. So I want to underscore something here. And that is that this could put you over your 10%, and that's why that note is very important. But the note is also, as a former grantee, the note is also very important for your state and local auditing. There really isn't another line to put these expenses in, but if they're classified as program, you're going to want to make that as clear as possible to an auditor who might be looking over your reports and your expenditures and may say, wait, you've either gone over your 10% admin or you classify this as program here, but in this federal report, you're calling it admin. So it's very important for both OCS, enterprise, as well as your own internal record keeping, that you are specifying clearly which portion of those administrative costs were related to program IT expenses. I already mentioned the statute limits the amount that states obligate in planning administration to 10% of the funds available are payable to the state. If a state obligated less than the allowed 10% to administration and planning costs in the previous fiscal year, the state may obligate funds received in the previous year and carried over to the current fiscal year for administration and planning. This is another place where, if you're carrying over admin funds from the previous year, carrying them into admin for this year, if it's going to put you over the allowable 10% costs. And if this is the case, please add a note to explain this, or you will get a call from us. So this is the estimated total uses of funds. So this is a locked field and cannot be edited, and it's basically auto-calculated based on everything you've entered in section, in parts A and B of this section. Once you validate the form, the field will be updated to show the sums of item 1 through 4 and 6 through 14, and it'll basically sum up all the uses, right? And so this is where you get to make sure you did everything right. The estimated total uses should equal the total sources. Now, once again, we talked about a few of the exceptions to this rule. Primarily the one being that you're returning unobligated funds to the feds. But if that's not the case, you should see both of those numbers match. There are some things that give OCS a little bit of clarification. Remember, this data has to be reported to in the report to Congress, and so it's important that we understand as much as we can without plaguing you with 1,000 questions about the variations in program design, and so and in your responses. So there are two kind of supplemental questions here. The first is whether your state obligated funding for a given type of assistance in 2017, but won't serve households until 2018. So, you know, we gave this example before. Some of you may obligate 15% of your funds to weatherization, but you're not actually going to spend those funds on households until 2018. And so in that case, you would just select yes. And then some of you may have, because of your program design or your program operation or delivery methods, you may calculate your average benefits, average household benefits a little bit differently. And so if that is the case, we ask you to select yes, and then specify in the notes what that calculation is or why you're estimating. So I expect there to be questions here.
We do have one note from Heather Jones, who said that she just wanted to note that Lauren issued an action transmittal 2018-03 that indicates that grantees had to submit the carryover and reallotment report.
Okay. Thank you, Heather.
But besides that, it doesn't look like we have any questions, Melissa.
Okay, if you want to go to the next one then. So final reminders. So when OLDC calculates your total uses of funds and sources of funds, it rounds the funding amounts you enter to the nearest whole dollar. And remember, we want those uses and sources to match. And so it's really, to save yourself some headache, report your funding amounts rounded to the nearest whole dollar, and that will keep you from having rounding errors that lead to a mismatch. If you obligated funds to an allowable use of funds that exceeded any of the limits described in this webinar, so the 15% weatherization, the 10% admin, the 5% assurance 16, the $35,000 in leveraging incentive, any of those, we first want you to verify that the amount is correct. And if it is correct, we want you to explain in the notes section why you exceeded those limits. I think I've already gone over this, but you know, the third bullet is really the key. If you're uncertain, add a note. And the biggest things are really things that explain or clarify program features that are unique to your program. And the best way to leave a note, there's some examples here, is to include the section and the item number of the data field from Module 1. That way, when we see the note, we can tie it back to whatever field it is you're referencing. If you know there are inconsistencies between your grantee survey and the household report or your model plan, or if you're getting warnings that you've already checked and confirmed, and regardless of the warning, the information is correct, those should all be triggers for you to leave a note, because all of those things are triggers for a prize to call you. So unless we see a note, we will call or email you to follow up and ask for further clarification. So to save that, save yourself from that call or those emails, just add a note. This is a really cool resource. I can't underscore it enough. It's something new that Apprise is doing this year. We have a check before you submit document for all required LIHEAP reports. It basically, once you've completed your report or think you're pretty close to complete, we encourage you to go to this link and look at this checklist and go through and just double check and make sure you've done kind of all of the things that are needed to submit an accurate report. And Apprise has had years of experience now reviewing these reports. They know where common issues are, and that's what this document really helps to prevent grantees, even the most experienced grantees, from making errors and having to resubmit their data later. And then, as always, as we mentioned before, anytime there's a warning in OLDC, even if the data is correct and you know it's correct, make sure you're reviewing those carefully and leaving a note. As Leon mentioned, this form is currently under review at OMB. Upon approval, HHS will publish an action transmittal with the final due date and instructions for accessing and submitting the form. As Leon mentioned, although there's not a deadline, the form is available in OLDC to go in and complete, and you just can't certify it. And so I really encourage you to go in and do that as soon as you can. Remember the performance, I'm going to click back just a second, make sure I grab that. So we didn't put in a cool graphic that we normally do, but remember that the performance data form, just like any other report, I know there's a lot of new folks on the call, there are multiple steps in OLDC, and it is not something that you can leave until the last hour and do quickly. And so it's really important that you get in there and you enter it and you save it and you certify and submit it and initiate and all of these different things. And so it's just key that you get in there when you can. Okay. So there are lots of resources. As we mentioned, the data form action transmittal and the data form instructions are pending OMB approval. And so as soon as that happens, those will be released by OCS. We do, however, have this check before you submit document. You can also view your past data in OLDC or on the data warehouse. I'll tell you, as a first-year coordinator, I spent a lot of time looking up past forms to see if my numbers were anywhere close to the previous year's numbers. And so now you don't have to go through file cabinets or hard drives to do that. You can go right to the data warehouse and get this information. And I cannot underscore enough the value of this last bullet, this carryover and reallotment tool. It talks about obligations versus expenditures. It talks about what should be counted in your carryover. It's just a very awesome resource, and I encourage even experienced program directors to take a look at it. So I mentioned before, don't wait to get into OLDC. It is accessed through Grant Solutions. The login is here. This shows you how to get to OLDC, and it also provides a help desk. So for those of you who might have login issues or challenges, you can contact Grant Solutions directly. I know in the past the liaisons have also encouraged you, if you're not having luck through Grant Solutions or not getting the help you need, to the help desk to encourage your liaison or to contact your liaison directly. And we've listed here all of those resources. So the OCS liaisons, there's a link here which will lay out who your liaison is based on your state, as well as Patrice mentioned, there are alternates for each state region. The Grant Center of Excellent Help Desk, this is related to OLDC, and the Apprise team. There are 4 of us. 3 are on the East Coast, and I'm on the West Coast, so we have kind of all the time zones covered. Feel free to call or email us, and we will either help you or get you to the right person. We do have an additional webinar, as I mentioned at the top of this session, on Wednesday, January 17th. This is 30 minutes or less, and it's just going over some of the key common reporting issues we see when people turn in their grantee survey. So it's kind of a checklist to make sure you've gotten everything right and that you're thinking about the right things. And so for those of you who might be new to this, after you've kind of gone in and looked at your grantee survey, kind of have a plan for tackling it, or have started to complete it, this would be a nice webinar for you to come back to make sure that you've gotten everything correct. We also do provide a refresher of the main reporting requirements and nuances. So for those of you who have IT folks who have completed this year after year, this would be a great session for them to call into to make sure that they're doing everything correctly. Finally, are there questions? While people are thinking of their questions, I just want to say I remember spending after hours times in my cubicle and when the department was already dark, trying to figure out one field or two fields in this report. And I wish I'd known that there was help out there. I really encourage you to not spend a lot of time banging your head against your desk. Call if you have a question and we'll help walk you through it. And we can do it pretty quickly in most cases.
It doesn't look like there's any questions, Melissa.
All right, great. So if there are questions that you think of after the webinar, don't hesitate to contact any of us on that last slide that we presented. Otherwise, I wish you all a Happy New Year, and we look forward to seeing you again on January 17th.